The smell of coffee and betrayal has a distinct aroma, bitter, with undertones of lies and a finish that burns your throat on the way down. I should know. I was breathing it in at 6:30 on what was supposed to be the happiest morning of my life. My name is Jack Mallory, and I've spent the last 15 years of my life believing in fairy tales. Stupid, right? A 38-year-old mechanic from Detroit thinking he could live happily ever after with a woman who collects designer handbags like I collect socket wrenches. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Isabella, my Izzy, was supposed to be getting her hair done at some fancy salon downtown. Instead, I found her in our bed with Hale, her ex-boyfriend from college, doing things that definitely weren't part of the wedding preparation checklist. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, still holding the cup of coffee I'd made for her, watching my entire world collapse in real time. Connor's muscled back was facing me, his expensive watch glinting in the morning sunlight streaming through our curtains. Isabella's manicured nails were digging into his shoulders, her engagement ring, my grandmother's engagement ring, catching the light as she moved. "Oh, God, Connor, yes!" she gasped, completely oblivious to my presence. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering against the hardwood floor we'd picked out together last spring. The crash made them both freeze. Isabella's eyes met mine over Connor's shoulder. For a split second, I saw something that might have been shame flicker across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation I'd started noticing more and more lately. "Jack," she said, not even bothering to cover herself. "We need to talk." Connor rolled off her, grabbing a sheet to cover his lower half. He had the decency to look embarrassed, at least. "Dude, I'm sorry you had to see this." "Sorry I had to see this?" I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. "On our wedding morning? You're sorry I had to see my fiancée screwing her ex-boyfriend in our bed, wearing my grandmother's ring?" Isabella sat up, pulling the other sheet around herself like some kind of twisted toga. "Don't be dramatic, Jack. This doesn't have to change anything." "Doesn't have to change anything?" I stared at her, wondering if I'd ever really known this woman at all. "Izzy, we're supposed to get married in 8 hours. She had the audacity to shrug. "So, this is just physical. Connor and I have history. It doesn't mean I don't love you." Connor was getting dressed now, his movements quick and nervous. "Look, man, Isabella and I never really got closure. This was just, get out." My voice was quiet, but something in my tone made Connor stop mid-sentence. "Get out of my house, now." He grabbed his clothes and practically ran for the door. I heard the front door slam a minute later, followed by the sound of his BMW peeling out of our driveway. Isabella was still sitting in our bed, looking at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "Jack, don't make this bigger than it is. Connor doesn't mean anything. He's just what? Just a good lay? Just someone to pass the time with while your boring mechanic fiancé is at work?" I sat down heavily in the chair by our window, suddenly feeling every one of my 38 years. "How long, Izzy?" "How long what?" "How long have you been sleeping with him?" She looked away. "It's not like that." "How long?" 3 months, she whispered. 3 months. We'd been planning this wedding for a year, and she'd been cheating on me for a quarter of it. I thought about all the late nights she'd claimed to be working, all the business trips that seemed to come up suddenly, all the times she'd been too tired or too stressed for intimacy with me. "The business trips to Chicago?" I asked. She nodded. "The late meetings with clients?" Another nod. "That weekend you went to your sister's?" "Connor has a cabin up north," she said quietly. I stood up, walking to our dresser where she kept her jewelry box. My grandmother's ring was still on her finger, but there were other pieces I'd given her for birthdays, anniversaries, Valentine's Days. Suddenly, they all felt contaminated. "Jack, please," Isabella said, finally showing some emotion. Don't throw away everything we have because of one mistake. One mistake? I turned to face her. 3 months of lying, cheating, and betraying me is not one mistake, Izzy. It's a choice you made over and over again. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand. Probably the wedding coordinator, or the caterer, or one of the 100 other people who were expecting us to show up and pretend to be happy today. "What do you want to do?" Isabella asked, and for the first time since I'd walked in, she sounded uncertain. I looked at her sitting there in our bed, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, and something cold settled in my chest. Something that felt like the death of the man I used to be and the birth of someone else entirely. "I want you to get dressed," I said calmly. "I want you to call your maid of honor and tell her to meet us at the venue early. And then I want you to help me make some announcements." "What kind of announcements?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. The kind that are going to make this a wedding day nobody ever forgets. Thalia West had always been beautiful in the way that Isabella was pretty. Sharp edges and careful maintenance, like a sports car that looked great, but required constant attention. She was Isabella's maid of honor, her best friend since college, and the woman who had been quietly watching my relationship fall apart for months, with the keen interest of a scientist studying a particularly fascinating specimen. I called her at 10 a.m., 2 hours after discovering Isabella's betrayal, 1 hour after Isabella had finally stopped trying to justify her actions and started making phone calls to postpone the wedding. "Jack?" Thalia's voice was surprised. "Shouldn't you be getting ready? The wedding is in 4 hours. "There's not going to be a wedding," I said. "At least not the one everyone was expecting. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner? I need to talk to you." There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," I said, and meant it in a way that would have scared me 6 hours ago. "Just meet me there. And Thalia, don't tell Isabella where you're going." Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that served coffee in thick white mugs and didn't judge you if you ordered breakfast at 3 in the afternoon. I'd been coming here since I was a teenager, back when old man Murphy still ran the grill himself. Now his daughter Sarah ran the place, but the coffee was still strong, and the booths were still cracked vinyl that told stories. Thalia walked in 15 minutes later, wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than I made in a week. She looked around the diner, with barely concealed distaste, before sliding into the booth across from me. "Okay," she said without preamble. "What's going on?" Isabella called me crying, saying the wedding was postponed, but she wouldn't tell me why. I studied her face, looking for any sign that she already knew. Thalia had always been hard to read, but there was something in her eyes that made me think she wasn't as surprised as she was pretending to be. "I found her with Connor this morning," I said simply. Thalia's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the way her eyes widened. "Connor Hale?" "The very same. In our bed, 3 hours before I was supposed to marry her." "Oh, Jack." Thalia reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her skin was soft and warm, and I realized it was the first gentle touch I'd received all day. "I'm so sorry." "Are you?" I asked, turning my hand palm up so our fingers could intertwine. "Because you don't look surprised." Thalia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've been watching Isabella and me for months, and you've seen what I was too blind to see, haven't you?" She looked down at our joined hands. I suspected something was going on. She's been different lately. Secretive, happy in a way that didn't seem to have anything to do with the wedding. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have believed me?" she asked quietly. "You were so in love with her, Jack. So sure she was perfect." She was right, and we both knew it. 6 months ago, if Thalia had come to me with suspicions about Isabella, I would have defended my fiancée and probably stopped talking to her friend. The old Jack had been loyal to a fault, trusting to the point of stupidity. But the old Jack had died at 6:30 this morning, watching his fiancée betray him in their own bed. I have a proposition for you, I said, my thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. What kind of proposition? The kind that's going to give Isabella exactly what she deserves and give us something we've both been thinking about for a long time. Thalia's cheeks flushed pink. Jack. Don't tell me you haven't thought about it, I said, leaning forward. Don't tell me you haven't wondered what would happen if Isabella wasn't in the picture. The truth was, I had wondered. Thalia had been around for years, beautiful and smart and funny in ways that Isabella wasn't. She listened when I talked about work, asked questions about the cars I was restoring, remembered details about my life that my own fiancée forgot. More than once, I'd caught myself thinking about what it would be like to kiss her, to hold her, to wake up next to someone who actually seemed to enjoy my company. What are you suggesting? Thalia asked, but she didn't pull her hand away. I'm suggesting we give everyone at that reception the show they're expecting, just not the one they think they're going to see. I explained my plan while Sarah refilled our coffee cups and pretended not to eavesdrop. It was simple, really, elegant in its brutality. We would show up to the reception, which Isabella hadn't been able to cancel on such short notice, as a couple. I would get up in front of all our friends and family and explain exactly why there had been no wedding ceremony that afternoon, and then I would introduce them to my new girlfriend. You want to humiliate her, Thalia said when I finished. I want to give her the same gift she gave me this morning, I corrected. The gift of brutal honesty. Thalia was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. She's going to hate me, she finally said. She's going to hate both of us. The question is, do you care? Thalia looked up at me, and I saw something shift in her expression. Something that looked like decision. You know what? She said. I don't think I do. She leaned across the table and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like she was testing the waters. Then I kissed her back, and it became something else entirely. Something that tasted like possibility and revenge and the kind of passion I'd forgotten existed. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. So, Thalia said, her lips still close enough to mine that I could feel her words. What time should I pick you up for the reception? The Riverside Event Center looked exactly like it had yesterday during our final walkthrough. Elegant, romantic, and completely wrong for what was about to happen. White roses and baby's breath decorated every table, fairy lights twinkled from the ceiling, and a 3-tier cake sat on display, topped with figurines of a happy couple that no longer existed. I arrived at 5 o'clock with Thalia on my arm, both of us dressed to kill. She wore a red dress that hugged her curves and made her look like sin personified. I'd traded my planned tuxedo for a black suit that made me look dangerous instead of domesticated. The guests were already mingling, drinks in hand, probably wondering where the happy couple was. Isabella's parents stood near the bar, looking confused and increasingly worried. My best man, Dave, spotted me first. Jack! He hurried over, relief evident on his face. Thank God you're here. Where's Isabella? People are starting to ask questions. Isabella won't be joining us, I said calmly. But I have some things I'd like to share with everyone. Dave looked from me to Thalia, his expression growing more confused by the second. What's going on, man? You'll find out in a few minutes. Could you ask everyone to gather around? I have an announcement to make. It took 10 minutes to get everyone's attention. Friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, about 150 people who had come to celebrate a wedding that never happened. They clustered around the small stage where the band was supposed to play later, drinks in hand, faces expectant. Isabella's mother, Patricia, pushed to the front of the crowd. Jack, dear, where is Isabella? Is she all right? Isabella is fine, I said, taking the microphone from the confused band leader. In fact, she's having the time of her life, just not with me. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw Isabella's father frown, My mother's face crease with worry, and Dave shake his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Thank you all for coming today to celebrate what was supposed to be the beginning of my marriage to Isabella Morrison. I know you're all wondering why there was no ceremony this afternoon, why the bride isn't here, and what exactly is going on." The room was dead silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, standing frozen with trays in their hands. This morning, at approximately 6:30 a.m., I walked into my bedroom to bring my beautiful fiancée a cup of coffee. Instead, I found her in bed with Connor Hale, her ex-boyfriend from college. They were not drinking coffee. The silence exploded into gasps, shocked exclamations, and the sound of Patricia Morrison's wine glass hitting the floor. "Now, I know what you're thinking," I continued, warming to my theme. "Poor Jack. Poor, betrayed, heartbroken Jack. What will he do now? How will he ever recover from such a devastating blow?" I paused, looking out over the sea of shocked faces. "Well, I'm happy to report that recovery has been swift and thorough. In fact, I'd like you all to meet the woman who helped me realize that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering that the person you thought you loved was never worthy of that love in the first place." I held out my hand to Thalia, who stepped gracefully onto the small stage beside me. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. "Thalia?" Patricia Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Thalia West? Isabella's maid of honor?" "Former maid of honor," Thalia corrected, taking the microphone from me. Her voice was steady, confident, and completely unapologetic. "And current girlfriend of the most honest, loyal, and decent man I've ever known." The crowd erupted again. I saw Isabella's college friends huddled together, whispering furiously. My co-workers from the garage were grinning and raising their beer bottles in salute. My mother looked like she was trying to decide whether to faint or applaud. "But wait," I said, taking the microphone back. "There's more." The room settled into an anticipatory hush. "You see, Thalia and I have been doing some investigating this afternoon. Curious about how Isabella could afford all those business trips, all those expensive dinners with clients, all those weekend getaways that seemed to have no business purpose whatsoever." I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying and opened it dramatically. It turns out that Isabella and Connor have been running a very interesting side business. They've been systematically embezzling money from Morrison Mallory Consulting, the company Isabella and I built together, for the past 18 months. Fake invoices, phantom clients, creative expense reports, very creative. Patricia Morrison made a sound like a wounded animal. Isabella's father, Richard, stepped forward with his face red with anger. "That's a serious accusation, Jack," he said. "I hope you have proof." "Oh, I have proof," I said cheerfully. "Bank records, email trails, receipts for hotel rooms and dinners that were charged to the company, but had nothing to do with business. I spent the afternoon with our accountant and our lawyer. Very educational." I handed the folder to Richard Morrison. "Feel free to look through it. I've already turned copies over to the police and the IRS. They were very interested." The room was spinning now, conversations breaking out everywhere as people tried to process what they were hearing. I saw Dave pull out his phone, probably texting other people who weren't here. The gossip mill was already churning. "The best part," Thalia said, stepping up to the microphone again, "is that Jack had all the company assets moved into his name only yesterday. Something about protecting them during the marriage merger. Very fortunate timing." That wasn't entirely true. I'd moved the assets into my sole control about 2 hours ago, with the help of an emergency court order based on the evidence of embezzlement, but the crowd didn't need to know those details. "So," I said, wrapping my arm around Thalia's waist, "while Isabella and Connor are probably wondering why their credit cards stopped working and their bank accounts are frozen, Thalia and I thought we'd come by and thank you all for the lovely gifts, the kind wishes, and the opportunity to share this moment with the people we care about. I kissed Thalia then, long and deep and passionate, while camera phones flashed around us and the crowd either cheered or gasped in shock. When we broke apart, I looked out over the faces of everyone who had come to celebrate my wedding and smiled. The bar is open, the food is paid for, and the band is ready to play. So please, stay and enjoy the party. Consider it a celebration of new beginnings, brutal honesty, and the beautiful karma that comes to those who wait. The party was in full swing when Isabella arrived. I was dancing with Thalia to a slow song, her body warm and soft against mine, when I saw the commotion at the entrance. Isabella burst through the doors like an avenging angel, still wearing the white silk robe she'd had on when I left her at the house. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared, and she looked like she'd driven here without caring about traffic laws or personal safety. Connor was right behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned to watch the drama unfold. Isabella's gaze swept the room, taking in the decorations, the guests, the cake, and finally landing on Thalia and me standing in the middle of the dance floor. Her face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, understanding, and finally, pure rage. "You bastard!" she screamed, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You absolute bastard!" She started toward us, but her father caught her arm. "Isabella," Richard Morrison said quietly, "don't make this worse." "Worse?" She spun to face him. "How could this possibly be worse? He's destroyed everything. The business, my reputation, my life." "You destroyed those things yourself," I said calmly, not moving from where I stood with Thalia. "I just made sure everyone knew about it." Isabella broke free from her father's grip and stormed across the dance floor. For a moment I thought she might actually try to hit me. Instead, she turned her fury on Thalia. "You," she snarled. "You backstabbing, conniving witch. I trusted you. You were my best friend." Thalia didn't flinch. "I was your best friend when you deserved one. That ended about 3 months ago when you started cheating on the best man you'll ever know." "Don't you dare lecture me about loyalty." Isabella's voice was getting higher, more hysterical. "You're sleeping with my fiancée." "Ex-fiancée," I corrected. "And technically, you were sleeping with yours first. I'm just a faster learner than you gave me credit for." The crowd was eating this up. I could see phones recording everything, social media posts being composed in real time. By tomorrow, this would be all over town. By next week, it would be legend. Connor finally found his courage and stepped forward. "Look, man, this has gotten out of hand. Isabella and I never meant for it to go this far." "Oh, you never meant to get caught," I said. "Big difference." "We can work this out," Connor continued desperately. "The money stuff, the business, we can pay it back. Make it right." I laughed, and it came out cold and bitter. "With what money, Connor? Your auto parts business is 3 months behind on rent. You've got creditors calling every day, and your credit is so bad you can't get a loan for a candy bar. That's why you were stealing from me in the first place, wasn't it? To keep your little empire from collapsing." Connor's face went white. "How did you know about your financial problems? Same way I know about the gambling debts, the tax liens, and the fact that your ex-wife is taking you back to court for unpaid child support. I spent the afternoon making phone calls, Connor. Amazing what people will tell you when you explain that you're investigating embezzlement." Isabella was staring at Connor like she was seeing him for the first time. "Gambling debts? What gambling debts? Didn't he tell you?" I asked with mock surprise. "Connor's been funding his poker habit with our company's money. That's where most of it went, not on romantic getaways and expensive dinners, on cards and sports bets and whatever other stupid risks he's been taking." The look Isabella gave Connor could have melted steel. "You told me the money was for us. For our future together. It was, Connor said weakly. I was going to pay it back. I had a system. You had a system? Isabella's voice cracked. You stole from my company to feed your gambling addiction, and you had a system? The crowd was watching this like a tennis match, heads turning back and forth between the players. I almost felt sorry for Isabella. Almost. The police will be here soon, I said conversationally. I called them about 20 minutes ago, told them the suspects in the embezzlement case would be at this address. Isabella spun back to face me. You called the police? I had to. It's my civic duty to report crimes, isn't it? Besides, I thought you might want to turn yourselves in before they had to come looking for you. Show some remorse, take responsibility for your actions. You know, all those things you never learned how to do. As if summoned by my words, I heard sirens in the distance. The sound made Connor go even paler. I need to go, he said, backing toward the exit. Go where? I called after him. Your passport's been flagged, your assets are frozen, and every cop in the state has your picture. But hey, good luck with that. Connor looked around the room like a trapped animal, then bolted for the door. He made it about 10 steps before Dave and 2 of my other friends from the garage blocked his path. Sorry, buddy, Dave said cheerfully. Jack asked us to make sure you stuck around to talk to the police. Wouldn't want you to miss that conversation. The sirens were getting closer. Isabella looked around the room at all the faces watching her. Friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, and I saw the exact moment she realized her life as she knew it was over. This isn't over, she said to me, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. Yeah, I said, pulling Thalia closer. It really is. The police walked in just as the band started playing again. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same booth at Murphy's Diner, reading the morning paper and drinking coffee that didn't taste like betrayal anymore. The headlines were about the usual things: city politics, sports scores, a new development going up on the east side of town. There was no mention of Isabella Morrison or Connor Hale, which was exactly how I liked it. The bell above the door chimed, and Thalia slid into the booth across from me. She was wearing scrubs. She'd gone back to nursing after Isabella's business empire collapsed, and she looked tired but happy. How was your shift? I asked, reaching across to squeeze her hand. Long. 3 car accidents, 2 heart attacks, and a guy who tried to deep fry a turkey in his living room. She signaled Sarah for coffee. How was your day? Good. Finished the '67 Mustang restoration. Client's picking it up tomorrow. I folded the newspaper and set it aside. Got some interesting news, though. Oh? Isabella's sentencing hearing is next week. Her lawyer called to see if I'd be willing to speak on her behalf. Character witness, talk about the good times, ask for leniency. Thalia raised an eyebrow. And? I told him I'd think about it. Are you going to do it? I considered the question while Sarah brought Thalia's coffee and refilled mine. Was I going to stand up in court and ask a judge to go easy on the woman who had betrayed me, stolen from me, and tried to destroy my life? No, I said finally. I don't think I am. The truth was, Isabella and Connor had gotten exactly what they deserved. The embezzlement charges had stuck, hard to argue with bank records and email evidence. Connor had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution he'd never be able to afford. His auto parts business had folded, his house had been foreclosed on, and his ex-wife had gotten full custody of their kids. Isabella had fared slightly better thanks to expensive lawyers and a willingness to testify against Connor. She'd gotten 18 months and probation, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. No one in the business world would touch her now. She was working at a call center in Grand Rapids, living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda. Good, Thalia said, taking a sip of her coffee. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. That was one of the things I loved about Thalia. She didn't believe in false sympathy or misplaced mercy. She understood that actions had consequences, and she didn't waste time feeling sorry for people who had brought their troubles on themselves. "Speaking of choices," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I have something for you." I pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the table between us. Thalia stared at it like it might explode. "Jack, open it." She picked up the box with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside was a simple solitaire diamond ring, not huge, not flashy, but perfect, clean and honest and beautiful, like the woman I was giving it to. "It's not my grandmother's ring," I said. "That one had too much history, too much baggage. This one is just ours." Thalia's eyes filled with tears. "Are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" "I'm asking if you want to marry a mechanic who's got grease under his fingernails, a smart mouth, and a tendency to hold grudges against people who cross him." She laughed, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "That depends. Are you asking a nurse who works nights, has strong opinions about everything, and helped you destroy your ex-fiancé's life?" "That's exactly who I'm asking." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Like everything about us had been made to fit together. "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." I leaned across the table and kissed her, right there in Murphy's diner with Sarah watching and grinning behind the counter. It tasted like coffee and new beginnings, and the kind of love that was built on truth instead of lies. When we broke apart, Thalia was smiling through her tears. "So," she said, admiring her ring, "when do you want to do this?" "Tomorrow," I said. "Next week, I don't care, as long as it's soon and it's real." "What about a big wedding? Flowers and cake and all that?" I thought about the reception 6 months ago, about Isabella bursting through the doors in her white robe, about Connor being led away in handcuffs while the band played and our guests posted videos on social media. "I think I've had enough of big weddings," I said. "How about we just go to the courthouse and make it official, then come back here for pie and coffee?" "Perfect," Thalia said. "Absolutely perfect." We sat there for a while, planning our simple wedding and our complicated future, while the sun set outside Murphy's windows and the rest of the world went about its business. Somewhere across town, Isabella was probably getting ready for another shift at the call center, another day of paying for her mistakes. Connor was in federal prison, learning that real life wasn't a poker game where you could bluff your way out of trouble. And I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly who I belonged with, finally understanding the difference between love and obsession, between loyalty and stupidity, between being a good man and being a doormat. The old Jack would have felt guilty about what happened to Isabella and Connor. He would have wondered if he'd been too harsh, too vindictive, too willing to destroy lives in pursuit of justice. But the old Jack was gone, buried under the weight of betrayal and reborn in the fire of righteous anger. The new Jack understood that sometimes being the villain in someone else's story was the only way to be the hero in your own. I looked across the table at my future wife, at the woman who had stood beside me while I burned down everything that had been built on lies, and I smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even. And then getting everything you ever really wanted. Thalia squeezed my hand. "What are you thinking about?" "Justice," I said, "and how good it tastes when you finally get to serve it yourself." She laughed, that bright, honest sound that had become the soundtrack to my new life. "I love you, Jack Mallory," she said. "I love you too, Thalia West, soon to be Thalia Mallory. Soon to be the happiest woman in Detroit." Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside Murphy's diner, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of betrayal planned their future over coffee and pie, while somewhere in the distance, the sound of justice being served echoed like wedding bells.